Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. To learn all about how to grow your business, go to our website at sparkpartners.com. And of course, look at past podcasts. We have a treasure trove of content out there. And I oftentimes refer clients and friends and others to these podcasts because we're looking at things from the lens of trends, and it's interesting how they play out over time. One of those early conversations we had was with a company that was developing a house in a shipping container, and we gave them some warnings, and they went their different way, and it ends up that maybe we were right. But it's not about being right or being wrong. It's about making the best decision based on the available information. And today we're facing a lot of information and misinformation about what's happening in Ukraine and Central Europe. There's been fighting. The Russians have invaded, and you can't even turn on the news and not see anything, only that at the moment. So we're going to talk about that briefly. I want to get your thoughts on that, Adam, and really want to understand and really bring to light to our viewers and listeners of what the long-term implications are of this conflict, and whether or not that this is a trend or this is going to be something that's going to be more like a fad and eventually wither away. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, we advise people all the time to identify the trends that are important in their business and track the trends so that they know what kind of adjustments they need to make in order to be successful. So when we think about the big trends, we've talked a lot about demographics and the aging population. We did a short series about environmental awareness, and then how that was affecting investing and product development, and how climate change would have an impact. And I think the big trend that we're talking about here is globalization. That globalization started back in the 60s. There was always a lot of robust trade with America and Europe, and America and Mexico, and America and Canada, and Japan. Those were our big trading partners back then, and they grew substantially. But it was Nixon, obviously, he opened up China for diplomatic relations. And then when we get up to the turn of the century, we start seeing the great outsourcing movement. And so people started to shut down factories and have things made in China, and they had things made in Thailand and Southeast Asia. And then we saw also around that time people starting to do business in Russia. During the Reagan administration, we had the end of the Soviet Union, and then it was eventually busted up, and people started saying, hey, let's do business with folks over in Russia. Why not? And these other countries like Ukraine that were neighboring countries of Russia. And we saw, really an expansion, especially in software. I think you and I talked last week about knowing people that had software developers that worked on a 1099, independent gig work basis, and some people had employees, and there were certainly folks that had even branches and development hubs that are in Russia. And so this globalization trend has been going on for a long time, and that trend is now being impacted. And what we have to do is we have to alter our scenarios, right? So we've got scenario planning. We've been planning on ongoing globalization, and now that trend has been kicked really hard by two big disruptions, right? So we get the first disruption is COVID-19, and it starts shutting down the shipping pathways and the supply chains on a globalized basis. China makes people stay at home. They can't go to work. A lot of countries go through that process, right? And people aren't going to work, so we don't have things on the shelves, and we try to get the economy going again, and it's hard. And then just as we started trying to get it geared up again, of course, we got hit with the Omicron variant, Delta and the Omicron variants, and that again hit the supply chains really hard. So we had to start thinking, well, okay, what about this globalization trend? Are we going to continue to look internationally for sources or not? And then we see Russia invade Ukraine. Really unexpected. I remember watching CNN and shows like Fareed Zakaria's GPS back about 6-7 weeks ago, and people were starting to talk about what was going on the border with Ukraine and Russia, and an overwhelming consensus was that there would be no invasion. That Putin didn't have anything to gain. It was a stupid idea. He wanted to keep Ukraine out of NATO, but gosh, he wouldn't go to war over that. So that was the opinion 6 weeks ago, and now the leader of Russia has taken the troops into the country, and there's fighting going on, and people are dying.
Yeah.
And so we have to sit here and say, well, what is the trend now, and what will happen in globalization? And I think that there's a lot happening here that's going to slow that trend down markedly, is my opinion right now. I thought it was going to come roaring back after COVID-19. I didn't think that the trend would go away. But now I'm seeing something different that's layered on top of it. The Putin invasion of Ukraine, but we also have bad relations between the United States and China, right? And China has, over the last decade, literally built islands in the South China Sea, literally built islands where there were none before, and they're all positioned as, to be able to land airplanes on them, helicopters, positioning for war with Japan, effectively, is what they've been doing. And they've been, rattling that saber really hard about whether they should have Taiwan. We brought this up last week on the call, Taiwan. And so what we're seeing now is a world in which there are leaders. Putin may live another 20 years. He may be overtaken by some kind of internal group in his country, or he may have a heart attack tomorrow and die. The guy's, I think, 69 years old. So you don't know what's going to happen with where you have a key figure like Putin in charge. But he does have an entire administration that are going to go into these sanctions with him. Maybe they'll get sick of it and they'll say, look, we were on a global stage and let's come back from that now. But I think what we have to say is that the trend has certainly been slowed significantly. Now, the second part of that is I would come in and take a look at these sanctions. When you see somebody take tanks, and you're watching on television and they're taking tanks, and they're going across a border and they got armored personnel carrier, that's very, very real, and that's very, very scary. And you hear, well, what we're going to do is we're going to sanction this country, and you start thinking, wow, that's kind of like throwing darts, I'm not sure that that's what we're doing. But let's go back again to the globalization thing, that trend. The reality is that Russia does business with the rest of the world, right? They sell gas to the rest of the world. Now people are saying we're not going to take your gas. Banks are refusing to do transactions with them. They're freezing their assets. So these Russians that have had money put into banks in England, France, Germany, the United States, those assets are being frozen. This morning, Switzerland said it was going to freeze.
That was a massive move. That move surprised me, frankly.
Yeah. So I guess the point here to that is that sanctions only work because of globalization, and the globalization trend was so strong that there's so many interlaced relationships between Russia and the rest of the world that these sanctions are having more impact than I would have thought. They're going to have more impact than sending in a fleet of Air Force jets to do some fighting with, because they were going to shut down. They could shut down the Russian economy, and how they're going to function. I was looking today the value of the Russian ruble. I remember back in 2010, I was working with a company in Chicago. And they were doing some software development, and they were using a development team out of Russia. And one fella had gone over there, I guess he was going 3 times a year or something like that, because they were a full team working full time for this company. And he would come back talking about how incredibly expensive Moscow was, that hotels in Moscow were more expensive than Manhattan and New York City. And I was kind of surprised. I didn't think of the economies being that robust. Well, now the ruble is literally worth, I think it went from $110 to 110 rubles. I'm trying to remember how it works now. But the value in terms of how many rubles it takes to get $1 has just gone, like 80% of the value is gone. So
I think it went down to 20.
Yeah, how can they do business if they don't have a currency that's functional, and they don't have a bank that's functional, and they don't have reserves that are functional? Now they're going to have to do everything internally. It's going to be all up to them. They're going to have to make their own bullets, going to grow their own food, everything. And if they take over Ukraine, you say, well, okay, now they just added 40 million people, which was part of their problem was the demographic trend we've talked about. So they try to solve one trend, but in solving that trend, if they It's like killing the goose that laid the golden egg, right? We go in
Yeah.
to get the Ukraine is kind of like killing the goose. It may taste good, but now what you really want, which is global business, so that you can have a thriving economy, that goes away. If you get isolated, that goes
Well,
away.
not only that, now you've got 40 million Ukrainians that are proud, and they're not going to be happy being part of the Russian Empire again. They weren't happy the first time,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not going to be an easy relationship if that does happen.
No, it'll be kind of like when Russia invaded Afghanistan, and they couldn't turn around because if the Afghans were going to kill them all, right? And they finally gave up and left Afghanistan. Unfortunately, we didn't learn the lesson, right? But in this case, you're right. You're going to have if most of the people of the Ukraine were very positive on Russia, they might be able to get it. But how do you get 40 million people to do their jobs and be supportive of a government leader in Putin that they despise? You know, you can run the country for a while with guns and having people with guns on the corners, but boy, I tell you, they don't have an army big enough to watch 40 million people. It's one thing to go into Crimea, which is much smaller. It's a very different thing to go into Ukraine.
No, that whole move of what Putin did just doesn't make any sense. And you're right, the sanctions are taking hold, and whatever momentum that Russia had built over the course of the number of years is going to be, of course, slowed down almost to a trickle.
Yeah. So what we're definitely seeing are a lot of brakes being applied to the globalization trend. Every month, we've been seeing the current administration, build on some of the patterns of the last administration in the name of national interest, saying, hey, instead of buying chips from Taiwan or buying chips from some other country in Asia, we're going to open up assembly plants, and we're going to do chip making plants and fab plants here in the United States. And today they announced they're going to put some more money into mineral mining and like copper, and it's in an effort to be less dependent on international trade. Well, if we're doing that, and China's doing that, and we start seeing other countries do that, then what happens is it shrinks, right? You shrink the balloon because you're saying, well, instead of this international supply chain, which I'm finding to be difficult because of COVID-19, which I'm now finding to be difficult because we don't know who we can trust anymore, then what we're going to do is we're going to go back and try to do business the way we did it 50 years ago, 60 years ago with less global trade. So you have to adjust the scenario at this point. I really think that's true. I think in real time, I wouldn't go forward, Pollyanna-ish, saying that we'll get back to the kind of global international trade that we had. Certainly not for less, it's really going to be a year or more if we ever can get back to that, because it'll take time for if whether Russia takes over Ukraine or doesn't take over Ukraine. The reality is that trust has been broken. And when the trust is broken, then it's sort of like, well, if I can't trust Russia, people will be scratching their chins. Can I trust? Can I trust
Pakistan,
China? That's the obvious one, right? Yeah. Can I keep doing business in Taiwan, or am I at risk that the Chinese military, which is vastly bigger than the Russian military, is going to take over Taiwan, and all of a sudden my production from Taiwan will be eliminated? What's going to happen in the Philippines, where we have a heavy-handed dictator down there that's sort of calling the shots on everything that goes on in the Philippines? A lot of people outsource call centers and fabric production and some other things to the Philippines. Well, what's going to happen to that, right? Is that business going to remain good, or is it going to get shut down as well? And if we start having problems there, what happens in the rest of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand? Again, countries where most businesses are connected. You may not be the company, you're not big enough like Apple that you went out and you opened facilities in those countries, but you're probably dependent upon parts that go into the things you buy. And so you do have a dependency, a supply chain dependency, and perhaps you even have a customer dependency by selling in those countries. So the globalization trend is definitely going to get slowed. And in the short term, it's heavily disrupted, right? We're going to go through a period of disruption. So it will not, whatever happens in a year or two, it won't look like it looked 2 years ago. It's not going to look like 2019. Again, because of the fears that were created by the pandemic, now fears that are being created by physical threats of warfare, the underlying trust, the underlying foundation for globalization is being hammered. And whatever we come out through this disruption on the other side, it is going to be a different kind of globalization than we had before.
Right. And I think it's up to the business owner to really look at how their business will be impacted or not by the slowing of this globalization. And, one of the number one things that a business can do is to be adaptable, is to be able to make those moves so that they don't fall into the trench. And I know companies right now that are trying their best to pull everything out of foreign countries. And they're doing it because of fear. And now, I haven't talked to these folks in a few months. Now I can imagine they're going to be the I told you so type folks, saying that, hey, listen, look, this is a clear example that's happened in Ukraine of why we shouldn't be doing business with anybody else except for the made in America kind of mentality, which is, again, not necessarily the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. It's just what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, and now start thinking about these, again, implications. Okay, so the trend is shifting. Now, what do we talk about with demographics? The lack of workers. The aging population has caused us a problem, not enough working age people to support the overall population. And we've seen that that's a national issue. It's not it's some problem that only exists in Wisconsin or Michigan. It's everywhere. Everywhere they're looking for workers, right? Now, if you say, well, instead of having products made in Russia, okay, if all those software engineers just got off the table. Now all of a sudden, I need the software, I need the upgrades, I need the cybersecurity efforts that I've always had, and that group of people, of experts, are suddenly unavailable to me. So I've shrunk the base. I've shrunk the number of people that can work. And at the same time, somebody who thinks they're really clever in administration says, well, for national interest, we're going to have that happen in the United States. And it's like, well, where are the people? Well, who's going to come in here and do this? Who's going to mine more copper or write more lines of software code? How do you think that's going to happen? So again, this will now affect immigration. I keep coming back to this again and again. So you have 500,000 people, I think, so far have fled Ukraine. They expect that number could easily become 5 million. Certainly, civilians don't want to stay somewhere where there's bullets flying, right? And so a number of them are going to leave. They're going to Poland. That's a bunch of immigrants. What's the policy going to be? What could you be doing? If they're talented people that had enough money, they were living in the Ukraine, they had enough money to live a nice lifestyle, have a car, and they were able to drive to Poland, is that somebody you should reach out to and say, hey, look, things look pretty tough. Maybe I should try to sponsor you on some kind of a program to come to the United States, right? Maybe we should be reaching out more aggressively to our Congress people and our senators and those people in politics and saying, hey, let's get those people to the United States. They'll help us solve a problem that we have with not enough workers, and we can get some talented people brought in. So those are the chain effects, the domino effects that we can start thinking about as globalization shuts down. And you want to put things in your own country. Well, does that mean that we're going to open up our borders? And if so, what would that look like? There's still an awful lot of people there's people on the one hand say, oh, great, let's be mad at Russia and call them names. And on the other hand say, but don't let any of those Ukrainians come to the United States. You see, that doesn't work, right? So the chain reaction of one big trend going through a disruption, like globalization, and now you're going to have an impact on all the other trends. And I think in this case, it's probably going to mean that immigration trend is one that, it's been flat. We haven't been immigrating people. The Obama administration wasn't big on immigration. The Trump administration wasn't big on on immigration. And now we're seeing that the Biden administration doesn't seem to be all that big on immigration. But it's got to change.
Let me ask you this: do you think that the war in Central Europe, the Ukraine conflict, or I guess it's a war at this stage, do you think that is a quote punctuated equilibrium to the entire market, or is it just one segment? And what are the implications of that? How big does something have to be the fabled punctuated equilibrium that we talk about?
Yeah, well, you look for a significant change in performance, right? So when we're looking, so typically you have like a new technology comes along and you can get 10 times the performance for the same price, right? Or you can get performance on a scale that you didn't have. Like you get mobility, and the old solution didn't give you mobility, so that's a dramatic change in how you get things done. And those are the punctuated equilibriums. So that's why I didn't call COVID-19 a punctuated equilibrium so much. What it was it was a disruption. But then you had some punctuated equilibriums in terms of work from home. It went through a punctuated equilibrium where we saw all the tools that were there suddenly come forward. The software tools that go on laptops, the microphones, the cameras, the movement towards cloud computing using products like Azure. Those were the things that got the punctuated equilibrium. They all took off like crazy, right? And we saw, Netflix price jumps, Facebook's price jumps, all these companies, they're the benefits of this punctuated equilibrium in the market. So that's what we're trying to look at now in terms of this globalization. If globalization is going to decline, if it's going to be disrupted, what's the opportunity that comes after that, right? What suddenly gets better? Now, I got to be honest, I haven't found that one yet. The one when we were going into the pandemic, it was pretty clear some winners. They're going to come out of that. Uber.
Yeah.
DoorDash. These
right.
it didn't take long. Amazon. You can sit there pretty quickly, start saying, okay, this is the disruption. This is where people are going to go. The new normal is going to have people shopping from home more, bringing prepared food home more, working from home more. All that's going to be the new normal when we get there a couple of years down the road, and we're seeing that happen now, right? The question will be, okay, we're going to disrupt globalization. So who's going to be the winners? It's probably not the airlines, right? Because we've built these massive airlines, global airlines, right? Because people were flying all over the world doing business. We could go anywhere. Now we won't be able to go anywhere. We're likely to have to see people going out and getting visas like they always did before. And so that's going to get more difficult. But there's going to be some kind of winner out of this, right? That's what I'm pointing out, is that and who will that be? And
the metaverse.
For example, metaverse will probably be a winner. Now, is Facebook far enough along that we can declare them, the stock to buy?
No,
I don't think that I want to make those specific level bets, but I think we ought to watch it. I think it would be really, really smart for people that are listening to this podcast I'd say, if you haven't experienced virtual reality, it's probably time to buy a headset. It's probably time to find out what this is like. It's not all just games and gaming. I mean, there's more to it than that. And so I would say you better get yourself aware about what's going on in that world and see if that could help your business.
Yeah, one thing that we should probably talk about and we'll schedule this for another time, is two other things. So we've talked about crypto and sort of DeFi or decentralized finance. And then, we should also talk about the whole idea of the NFT, because that's building a lot of momentum, and the people are saying it's a trend, people are saying it's a fad, and so I definitely want to make that our next topic, Adam, because that in itself is a whole episode for sure. But let's bring it back down to.
I do want to make one. Let's
sure
kind of catch on this. If we've seen two major disruptions here with the pandemic and now with the invasion of Ukraine. In both those instances, we saw the acceleration of trends, right? And so we're seeing things that are moving in a new direction. So I'm looked through the pandemic and I tried to say, okay, people bought more cryptocurrency, but I didn't see people rushing to establish cryptocurrencies as the baseline. Like the dollar, the euro, the yuan, those are baseline currencies that we measure against. We watched the cryptocurrency phase happen, and it was so sawtooth. 6,000 to 20,000 to 60,000 to 30,000 to 50,000 to 25,000 to 70,000. Okay, that's not something you bank on, right? And here there's supposed to be a currency that you can bank on. Well, right. You can't bank on that. When the war started in Ukraine, as we've come up to this, has that benefited cryptocurrency, right? Has it taken off? Are more people buying cryptocurrencies? Are people seeing crypto as a safe haven for their money? Like, say, gold. The price of gold's gone way up during this. But to reduce risk, people buy safe haven. Are they buying cryptocurrencies? And we don't see that. We still don't see that. There's too much of a sawtooth pattern. There's too much of a whip up and down that I could have any kind of comfort saying, oh yeah, that trend has really established itself and that trend is really going to continue to emerge. What we see are fits and starts. The price still can be changed merely by a tweet from Elon Musk. And there's multiple competitors, not just Bitcoin. There's Dogecoin and like a dozen others out there. I'm not at all comfortable that that's still a trend. I don't think it's a trend. I think it's still a fad, and people are kind of watching it. There are people dabbling in it. Everybody I know that owns cryptocurrency told me that they put money into it, enough money that if they lost it all, they wouldn't care. I think that's kind of stupid. Why would you invest in something with the theory that you were going to lose all your money? Be smarter to put it somewhere else. They're just gambling. They bought some crypto because they said, well, I think it could go up 10 times the value, because it's happened for other people at some point. So on the greater fool theory, if there's someone dumber than them that will spend 10 times as much as they did, they're out there buying crypto. Again, that is not a trend. That doesn't indicate a trend. That indicates a fad. So I think we've got some pretty good info already that says that while it's a big market, crypto is, it's still not one that I would rely upon.
Yeah, for sure. And then the NFT, we can dive into that. There's a lot of things happening in that domain. And I think that really goes to show people are looking for sort of new ways to invest, new ways to grow their portfolios. I guess one thing I'd like to share with with our listeners here and audience is that, when we're looking at these global events, we've got to make sure that we have the right pair of glasses on. We've got the right information that we're looking at. There we go, Adam. And, one thing that we've produced, Adam and I, is a course on innovation and growth. And, if you're not growing, you're dying, right, Adam? And certainly through all these events, you're running a business, you're looking at what's happening in the world stage, you're looking at what's happening in your own backyard. I happen to be in Tucson, you happen to be in on the West Coast there, Adam. And, we've got things happening here that are only local to Arizona. We have water issues. We've got lots of other things that we need to make decisions on, and you've got your own issues there. So I recommend, again, our course called Think Innovation, which really helps you to think like an innovator and look at things in a different way. And I think our course, Adam, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, it's foundational. It really creates a massive disruption in your own head on how to look at the world and apply what you see in the world to grow your business.
Yeah, again, if you've sat down and thought about the big trends and how they apply to your business, then you're ready to have the kind of conversation we had today when a disruption happens. Is this a short-term event or is it going to be a long-term disruption? Which I think certainly invading Ukraine is coming to light to demonstrate this lack of trust for the global economy, so therefore the impact of globalization becomes clear. And I think you've got to say, though, you've got to understand those trends before the disruptions happen, right? So that you're positioned to minimize your risk and increase your return. And you've said to yourself, oh, the big trends, demographics, environmental awareness, the aging population, globalization, all of those you should have in a framework so that your scenario planning is built on that framework. And then when something happens, you can say, it's reinforcing that scenario or it's not reinforcing that scenario. So it's more likely that scenario will happen, or is it less likely that scenario is going to happen? But if you haven't gone through the process of tracking the trends, or you haven't gone through the process of creating the scenarios, then you're guessing, right? You're shooting in the dark because you didn't ever put a framework in place to build your plans on. And that's where these tools come in. The tools are designed to help you take this very large, complicated world and start to identify, hey, these are the things that are important to me. Now I can recognize why they're important to me, and now I can start to track the numbers that are important. So if you've done business in Russia in the past, now how much business was it? Or did you have stuff you sold to France that ended up in Russia? Are you selling things into China? Or again, or parts? If you might be out there selling an electronic something, but the parts in it may come from Taiwan. And now Taiwan, you've got to be very aware. You better be tracking what's going on, because the perfect opportunity is lining up here for the Chinese to make their effort at Taiwan the same way that Russia's made its effort at Ukraine. But if you don't have that in a framework and you don't have your scenarios, then again, you're just not prepared.
Very well said, Adam. Very well said. Well, thank you for your time, and invite all our users our listeners to send us an email if you have any questions or thoughts. Manny@sparkpartners.com or Adam@sparkpartners.com. Wishing everybody a very healthy week, and we'll talk to you next week, Adam.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.